My name is Dr. Grace Telesco. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco. I'm joined by Dr. Teresa Lily White, Dr. Lenore Walker, Mr. Ed Denzel. Investigation with Dr. T is something that actually was the brainchild of our dean, Dr. Durham. And now, coming up this next season, we're going to be doing it almost weekly, a weekly show on a Thursday night. So lots of really cool guests. It's not just police topics, it's not just corrections topics, but it's topics that are affecting us in kind of all areas. But one of the things that we hope to get across is raising awareness, educating about some of these really important topics like human trafficking, topics like disasters. We did a show, Confessions of a Serial Killer. So for this upcoming season, we've got a couple of really cool things. We're going to have a day in the life of a DEA agent. Another really cool one, which is really close to my heart, is going to be on September 11th. Because not only do we want to talk about 9/11 and the work of the NYPD, but I also want to really look at the mental health outcomes. You know, we also have the human trafficking panel. We are going to bring back our Brevard Sheriff, Sheriff Wayne Ivey. It's always a pleasure to have him on. We're going to have Unfound again, Ed Denzel. He'll be coming back a few times, and that's going to be really exciting and interesting too. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco, and we are live streaming from the Abraham Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. And I am joined tonight by an amazing individual. I'm going to read his bio, Dr. Anthony Mottolo. He also goes by Tony. I know him as Tony, and he'll tell you how we know each other, but we do know each other. He's an assistant professor of criminal justice and homeland security at University of Tennessee's Southern Campus, and he has over 35 years of law enforcement and private security experience, including, in my humble opinion, one of the greatest police departments ever, the NYPD, the New York City Police Department. He was also part of the United States Air Force Security Police and the National Basketball Association Security. He retired as a sergeant detective after 25 years of service with the NYPD, where he supervised assignments including terrorism, gang intelligence, the Detective Bureau, Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit, anti-gang, graffiti units, and patrol. He was a first responder and search leader for recovery efforts and supervisor of security details in the immediate aftermath of the World Trade Center attacks. He conducted investigations into mass shootings and civil unrest across the United States with the Intelligence Division's Strategic Intelligence Unit, including assisting the Boston Police in the Boston Marathon terrorist attack. Dr. Mottolo has a master's in public administration from Marist College, and his doctorate is from none other than NSU School of Criminal Justice, where he got his PhD in criminal justice. Tony, welcome. I feel like we know each other for a very, very long time. And just tell our viewers how we kind of what we have in common and how we know each other.
Well, actually, we were besides being the NYPD, years ago, I actually was writing a book on graffiti, and I came to visit you in the police academy to speak to you in the police science section. We spoke briefly. It was prior to 9/11, but and I think at the time you were a sergeant still at the time. I was still an officer, and we were talking about juveniles. I was starting a program called actually JAG, Juvenile Anti-Graffiti Program, for a family court probation system, to try to turn kids around from being involved with gangs and doing graffiti, wrecking the community, and kind of just identifying the problems that we were having with our youth of New York. So that's our connection. Besides being NYPD alum, as you could say.
That's right. NYPD family. So
Exactly.
you're my sibling, you're my brother. And you also were involved in during 9/11, and our paths must have crossed at some point, either in the command, Pier 90.
Yeah.
I was at Pier 92. You might have been out of Pier 94.
Yeah, I was at Pier 94. And then also I
Yeah.
was at World, I was down at, the site a lot.
Yeah.
Because I was actually for quite a while, I was the liaison to the fire department for dig details to reassign with the battalion chief on who would take over piles for body recovery,
Yeah.
and and then I'd make my way back and forth.
Right.
You know.
So, like during that time, and this is not our topic tonight, but since we have that in common, it's always nice to commiserate and share about what where you were when all of this was going on, and what some people don't understand, and some of our students who were like 1 years old or 2 years old or no or 0 years old, and they were in heaven as cherubs. They can't really fathom. They think of 9/11 as a day in history, but for us it was a year and a half of constant work at ground zero. Now, I was involved with the families, and you were involved with the actual recovery efforts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was, besides the recovery efforts itself, and we would set up a lot of security details because we had a lot of people trying to come down and help, or take things, I guess you could say. So we had to set up security details, and a lot of people don't realize, besides just a huge crime scene that it was essentially, World Trade Center area was a crime scene. We were
Right.
trying to gather parts from planes and things of that sort. We had to continue to move the people of New York. We had to keep everything up and running. So it was a daunting task. And then on the tail end of that, building an intelligence division that was going to do something that no other police department's done before, right? Fight terrorism. We were crime fighters, not terrorism fighters, and the NYPD becoming a world connection, sending people overseas to
Right.
to report on it and create an intelligence division that was just astronomical.
Yeah. So it was really good work. And speaking of good work, you decided that you wanted to, after Marist College, which is, by the way, if you're a New Yorker, that's a really good school, Marist.
Marist Polls, right? Everybody knows what
That's
Marist
right.
Polls for
So
voting.
anytime that you're an alum from a school that is prestigious, and that you just love so much, and you want to honor and respect it, you want to brag on it. So Marist, to receive your master's from Marist is a big deal. My master's is from John Jay, but I mean, hey, I still love my alum.
Yeah, of course.
That's my alum. I love them too. But Marist is really top notch school. So is Nova Southeastern University,
Yes.
top notch school, and prestigious university. And so you decided that you were going to go for your PhD in criminal justice with us.
Yes.
Why? Why us?
I will tell you hands down why. NSU has a lot of the staff are former practitioners. They have been there and done that. Learning from people that have been there and understand that side of it. I think we use the term everybody's been using, pracademic, that academic side and that, practitioner combined into one professor, I think is important. I think it's important for students to receive that on both sides, and then the little war stories sprinkled in there as well in our teaching styles. But NSU has that, and I will be perfectly honest with you. I was accepted into another program. I'm not going to say which one. I pulled from the program to go to NSU.
Remember that?
Yeah,
Didn't I have a conversation with you?
Yeah, we had a conversation about that. But I don't want to mention any schools. But I pulled from the school because I just thought this is more where I want to get my doctorate from. And that's why I came to NSU, and thankfully was accepted to NSU. I didn't realize that the acceptance rate was so low. If I had known that prior, I would have been a little more nervous. But fantastic. It took me almost 4 years, working full time and going to school full time, basically, to get my doctorate. But it was well worth it, and I'm so proud of it.
Yeah, and you ought to be proud of it, because we have a very, it's a program of rigor, and when you get to defend, when you're at the end after you've done your dissertation and you've compiled your results and you've done your analysis and you're talking about the so what piece, the implications,
Right.
for policy and practice. By the time you get to that, you have a lot to be proud of. And so you decided that you had a very particular topic in mind for the dissertation and for your study. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, the impact of COVID-19 on labor trafficking. Now, last week, we had the Human Trafficking Forum. So we had the Florida Alliance to End Human Trafficking was part of my the show last week. We had 2 federal law enforcement agents, and we also had a victim of human trafficking. And so they went over a little bit for us, sort of a working definition of what labor trafficking is, how it falls under human trafficking. And so maybe if you can, for all of our guests, for all of our listeners, because by the way, P.S. back at the ranch, after we end our program tonight, I usually go in and I download the audio and then I upload that to Spotify. So we're also, all of our programs, all of the episodes are on Spotify, and you could listen to them in the car in case, you don't get it live. You catch it on the rerun. You can catch it on the rerun in your car.
Right.
Okay.
Excellent.
So Tony, take it away. Tell us about what this is. First of all, what labor trafficking is. How does it fall under the umbrella of human trafficking? What makes it different? What makes it unique? And then, introduce your study to us.
Okay. Excellent.
Spotlight your video.
All right. Excellent. Basically, one thing I'd like to start everybody off with and bring up is, how did I select it as a research product? I, back in 2013, was working with the NYPD in the intelligence division, and I was sent with a lieutenant down to the border to actually work with the Texas State Police, DPS, to view the border and the border operations, to see, firsthand, what was human trafficking, what was the cartels like, what was the drug trafficking, arms movement and such. We were in the Northeast a little separated from that, and the NYPD was already touching on the fact that we might have a problem. We were seeing cartel operations coming into the New York area. So, as far as just picking it as a research product, I was there and firsthand saw what is the ramifications to human trafficking, especially to children and families. So, you think of human trafficking, a lot of people merge or think of human smuggling as part of human trafficking, and that's far from the truth. Human smuggling is an agreement. It's like a fee or a service that you're agreeing upon to get moved across the border. Whereas human trafficking is the actual exploitation of men, women, and children for the purpose of forced labor, or commercial sex. So the ideology that a human smuggler can turn, or someone who's smuggled can turn quickly into a human trafficker or traffickee, is important to understand. So you might not start off, being trafficked. You might be an agreement, you're moving across the border, you're being smuggled. That's one aspect of it, but you can turn into someone that might actually fall under becoming traffickee. Human trafficking has 2 variables, as Grace, you were discussing, labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Labor trafficking, obviously, it's for forced fraud, coercion for labor. It can include debt bondage. It can include, forced labor, involuntary servitude. It could include child labor. So it's often, and the term that is often used, modern slavery. Sex trafficking, on the other hand, individuals, patronizing, soliciting, or performing commercial sex acts based on force, fraud, and coercion. It's that recruitment and harboring both, and the transportation of both, that develops human trafficking. And those two variables are often studied. The reason why I chose labor trafficking is because it's the least studied. Sex trafficking has quite a bit of studies out there, and I wanted to bring some research to the field and make it germane for the industry and for the stakeholders that are involved, to see the other side of human trafficking that's not often studied. So that was my intent. That was my intent in the early stages of it. I started my research in 2019. So in 2019, there was no COVID-19. It wasn't until 2020. And as I started doing more of my research on labor trafficking, I started seeing that impact of COVID-19 on the labor market and what it was going to have as far as an impact. So if you think of, like the International Labor Organization back in 2017 said about 20 million victims of labor in the US. And I mean, in the world, and those numbers include the US. So you start identifying how many people are working on farms and agriculture and the construction industry, or working in nail salons, or even some sex workers that are forced style labor. Could fall under both. They would work in restaurants during the day, forced to work in restaurants during the day, and then in the evening forced to be sex workers. So a lot of variables to understand and to bring out in my research. And that was my main point, and the risk factors that associated with that tends to be with our migrant population. We have labor trafficking from many of our prisoners that come out, who have past felonies, have done long stints in prison. They are often labor trafficked as well. They can't get jobs, they need help, and they're forced into labor for very, 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 very low pay because of the situation that they're in. So if you look at labor traffickers from various aspects, migration, or here in the US, we also have child labor here in the US. So I think that the study started taking on its own, it started building tentacles that I was trying to hone in. We had migration coming in, right? We had issues coming with Title 42 down at the border operations, and we had, labor. You couldn't buy, toilet paper towels. The service industry was struggling. Workers, everybody's out who was working, forced labor.
Yeah, I want to just capitalize a little bit on your experience. You said you went down to the border.
Yes.
You were down there. Can you describe that for us?
Something like I would not have ever been able to connect the two as well if I didn't actually see it with my own eyes.
So tell us, because many of us haven't seen it.
Okay. I will say this: the border, and this research is about truth. Okay, so it's not about politics; it's about truth. The truth of the matter is the borders are not secure, and not secure to the point that transnational organized crime organizations use the migration and people as tools to bring over their drugs, but also to traffic other people. The amount of people that I saw that are thrown away by the cartels, children being thrown into the water as a way to divert attention, or law enforcement's attention, to patrol, and now they're on a rescue operation to rescue children in the water, so that a mile up they can cross narcotics and bring over drugs and such, weapons, whatever it might be, going to Mexico or narcotics coming into the U.S.
So when we think about, I'm just gonna get a little just consciousness raising here, a little.
Yeah, you have to slow me up because I'll just keep talking about other things.
No, it's cool. It's cool because we have to get to your study.
Yeah.
But when folks hear about the border and they hear about immigration, illegal immigration, right? They're thinking in their minds that these are folks seeking a better way to live and are trying to circumvent the policies of immigration,
right?
Basically, and not do it according to whatever the process is, right? Whatever the protocols are. But what folks don't understand is that as you mentioned, it's the organized crime, it's the cartels, it's the criminal enterprise that victimizes the very folks that are seeking a better way of living, but they're being entrapped and kidnapped and taken hostage into this criminal lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And they're victims.
They're victims. And
period.
No one crosses the border without the gatekeepers, and the cartels have what they call gatekeepers. They use the coyotes, which are obviously the people that bring them over, but the gatekeepers are in charge of the narcotic transportation in certain areas of the sectors along the Arizona and the Texas border. And those gatekeepers are involved very much so in the human trafficking and the smuggling of people across the border. People just don't travel on their own to the border and make it across. There is the cartels run that operation, and people are not aware of that. No one makes it to the border without paying money and to cross the border. In my study, I mean, depending on the nationality, whatever nationality you are, the cartels will charge you based on your nationality. You could pay upwards of $9,000 just across the waterway, just across the water.
And when you say it depends on the nationality, what do you mean? Can you be specific?
Well, if you are of Mexican descent or El Salvador and Guatemala, Latin countries, you might pay less than someone who's Asian or someone from the Middle East or someone from Russia or Africa. Many times they're paying more money to cross. Mexican cartels will keep the price down for more of the Latin countries or Latin victims that are out of Latin countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, things of that sort. So they'll charge more money based on your ethnic background or your race. There is that is not an issue with them. They don't care. It's about money.
Right.
It's about money.
And so it's the exploitation of these poor immigrants who are suffering in their own countries at the hands of cartel and
Yes.
and other criminal enterprise, poverty, lack of resources, all of the stuff that we know. Why they're trying to escape a very, very bad situation,
right.
But then they become vulnerable.
Right, and it's fun
and exploited.
Yes,
no, just go ahead.
I apologize because what I was going to say, capitalize on what you were saying, is that you think of the push-pull factor, right? In any situation, the push-pull factor and the research studies that are done by it don't take into account that sometimes governments are pushing these victims into the cartels.
Exactly.
All right, and then when they're pushing them in, they're being pulled in by the cartels to commit criminal activity that they normally would not have done. All right, you're gonna have to pay. You can't pay, you'll have to carry this across, or when you get across, you go into debt bondage. So you have children that are paying smugglers and traffickers money working in the United States in companies and having to pay their travels.
Right.
They're in debt bondage. There's debt bondage in the United States.
And so labor trafficking existed way before COVID-19 happened.
Yeah.
But what was it about COVID-19 and the pandemic that really impacted the vulnerability for labor trafficking?
Well, I mean, obviously, Title 42 had a huge impact on it because, everybody's shutting the border. And asylum seekers not having the ability to have a way into the United States. We also had an issue with our H visas, right? Our temporary visas that allow people to get work, temporary work in the United States, enter the United States. What happened with COVID-19? A lot of the people that were on H visas, they're supposed to leave after a certain time. Well, COVID-19 happened. There's no one working. The people that were using those temporary workers kept them. They took their passports, they took their stuff from them, and they wouldn't let them leave. So we had people in the United States that had come here legally on visas, temporary work visas like H visas, and ended up being trafficked after their time ran out because they wanted to leave the country. They couldn't. So COVID-19 had an impact on that. The system itself, I mean, like you said, Grace, this has been going on for a long time, but the system has been broken for a long time, right? The whole asylum and coming into the United States system, the migration there's always been an issue with it. But when you put you have agents, the federal government, everybody shut down. People were working from home. Government agencies were working from home. Our courts started getting backed up. All this is happening, and then you have people that are trying to flee, their own countries that don't have the medical because of COVID-19, don't have, jobs now. Jobs are closing down. Restaurants are closing down. Construction was closing down. We couldn't get materials. So it exacerbated it by all these other issues where the cartels capitalized on it. They said, this is a moneymaker. Let's traffic people. Let's make more money on that. It's a way to continue to make money. Selling drugs takes a second, bringing a kilo takes a second, but trafficking a person, they continue to pay. So they saw an opportunity because of Title 42. I'm not saying that Title 42, and that's another issue, was a problem and caused that problem. What I'm saying is the transnational organized crime saw an opportunity to capitalize on it. And that's where we have another issue. So under one administration, we had the borders locked down, and then on another administration, they changed it where we started allowing the families and the children to come in. Again, the cartels capitalized on that, or transnational organized crime. What they started doing was people that were traveling without children, they said, oh, you need a family unit. They took children from other people and gave it to those families and just say that you're a child and to come across. And family units were getting separated. Children were being separated from their families or being sold for a fee. And then in one instance, one of my participants was explaining to me how the person who got their child across using that child actually sold the child back to the family. Said, you know what, you're gonna have to pay me to get your child back. So there was a host of things going on, and amongst all that, we had our industries, companies here in the United States that were struggling with personnel. People were out sick. People stopped working. How are they going to fill that void? How are they going to get people to work? Well, here's another opportunity, was the migrant population that was coming across the border. And the cartels and the coyotes saw an opportunity in that field as well. So do you want to discuss the study, or do you want to?
Yeah, I do. I definitely want to discuss the study. Before we get into that, just if you can just kind of operationally define for us coyotes. Some of our students may not know what that is. Some of them may.
Okay.
But let's just explain a little bit about what that is. You explained the gatekeepers. They're right. Sort of like the toll booth collectors.
Hey, exactly. They're toll booth collectors for right.
So tell us the coyotes. What are they?
They are the smuggler or the trafficker that is being paid a fee to bring people across the border. They know the routes. They know the ways to come in. Their their job is to get you from Mexico into the United States to a predetermined location. And at that point, they cut you loose. The fee is paid. But in many of those aspects, what's going on from the time you leave Mexico to the time you enter the United States? We have, rape. We have, molestation issues. We have theft. We have beatings, shootings, or people that are just left behind. They can't make the trip. It's a very daunting trip. Heat, right? Desert type atmospheres. They will leave you if you can't carry your own. And they have been finding bodies all over, the southern border.
Let me ask you this. What motivates people to want to leave?
Bad governments, police departments that are more military, all right, that are not on the up and up, if you want to say, very corrupt. I think that there's, no medical, no job security, no pensions,
poverty,
a lot of poverty. And then obviously coming into the United States, a host of other things when we start getting into language problems and things of that sort. Looking for education. What about the school systems for children? Lack of school systems. So it's obviously a better opportunity to bring these people into the US and they're looking for a way of life. It's just the amount of people has overwhelmed the US government and the border operations. So the cartels have said we have a way around that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that I don't people think of the corruption many times of some of the governments down there. People legally applying through Mexico to come in the United States are put on the back burner if they don't have the right money too. It could be a process that could take years. Right. So understandably, I know, whether you're an advocate on that side, or you're against the way the migration system, the immigration, either way, these people are victims in any aspect that you look at it.
Exactly. And then the bottom line is that, like in any type of victimization or study of victims' behavior or what makes victims is the vulnerability, and they're easily exploited because they're victimized on one end and then victimized on the other. All right. So I'm going to shut up now and you're going to tell us all about your study.
No, well, I mean, so we were talking about what was the impact, and I'm gonna try to share my screen here and show. Just want to make sure you can see that okay.
Yep, we see it fine, and we love that you have NSU in the upper left-hand corner, shamelessly plugging us. Go ahead.
Gotta represent. Through the end of the study, when I was getting into my final chapter, I saw the emergent themes, and the themes that I saw that were very, very important to the study, was that there was an interference with law enforcement response. Okay. The lack of collaboration between agencies here in the United States, and that the pandemic was leading to social issues for victims, the lack of training for our own law enforcement and the general public for understanding what labor trafficking is, and the migration process that we were just talking about, and finally, organized crimes control on human trafficking. And I think if I was to break down what some of my participants said, and the emergent themes on the right, the arrows circle around. We have Title 42, temporary visas, border. This is all the fund the police movements. This was all affecting at the time this situations that we're having. Now people say, why does the fund the police movement affect? Well, the first thing, as you know, Grace, that agencies do when they are low or minimal manning, they take away their specialized units. Well, our human trafficking units are being taken away, from local law enforcement. These agencies take those specialized units and start cutting them because they need personnel on the street. They're even putting detectives that are working homicides, You would work homicide today, and tomorrow you're in uniform. These agencies were suffering so much. Sanctuary city issues with sanctuary cities. It's something that people don't, they draw a line in the sand and they say, no, it's sanctuary city where we don't want to touch that. We want to leave it. But you have to take into account that traffickers are using sanctuary cities as a way to embed themselves with their victims, because agencies, the local agencies, do not want to get involved because it's a federal problem in those situations, and the feds are not allowed to work with the local law enforcement in those situations. And there are people that are suffering through this. So you do have to take into account sanctuary cities, because everybody wants to do broad brushstroke, but you are also hurting people. There has to be something to look at the way sanctuary cities handle the response from law enforcement and their federal partners to ensure that traffickers are not taking advantage of victims and the migrants that are coming in. So, redeploying personnel, these are all situations that, when we talk about collaboration, the lack of collaboration, one of them right there is alone is the local law enforcement. Many times in many of these agencies are not allowed to work with federal agencies. And then the federal agencies themselves are not working with each other. You have Homeland Security that runs a lot of the human trafficking, HSI. Then you have the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They're doing their side. Department of Labor, which does not have arrest powers, has summons powers. They're handling it in their own capacity. And then you have ICE handling it in their own capacity. But are they working together? In some aspects they are, in many aspects they're not. So are prosecutors actually prosecuting? Well, there are several states that have federally not prosecuted one person for or a human trafficker, not one, for human trafficking. And in a federal human trafficking report of 2022 recently released that 97% of federal cases were for sex trafficking, only 3% were for forced labor. 3%. Think of how many people are forced into labor in the United States, and we have only 3% federal cases out of 100%, 97 going to sex trafficking, which obviously sex trafficking is absolutely important, but I think there should be just as many for human trafficking for forced labor. And our pandemic issues that we were discussing, how does child labor? Well, we were discussing just a minute ago that child labor, children are filling the void for employees. What's happening is the companies like the auto industry and the food industry and the cleaning industry all have been, fined by the federal government for hiring or having children below the age of 18, many of them from the migrant population, working for these companies, but the companies themselves didn't hire them. The companies hire staffing agencies. Staffing agencies are using or getting people that are using, many times nefarious ways of getting people by taking a 13-year-old, getting them fake documentation to work, bringing them to the company, the staffing agency, and then the staffing agency is saying, here, we have people to put on your assembly line. So you have to consider that. Very, very little is being done on the child labor here in the United States because it was always viewed as, we don't have that issue. It's an issue overseas. It's not an issue overseas. It's right here. So, these are some of these emergent themes that we were discussing really started showing where our issues are in the voids, whether it was the training of law enforcement. Grace, I just question real quick. When you went to the police academy, how much human trafficking training did you get?
Oh, I don't think that there was any at that point, right?
Exactly. None.
Yeah, none.
So it has come where we are starting to train and we are starting to get more involved in that. So agencies like HSI are trying, non-for-profit organizations like Hope for Justice, they are trying to educate our law enforcement, but we want to ensure that we're getting the correct type of training. Are the prosecutors getting that? You can train law enforcement to identify it, but when you bring the case to a prosecutor, does the prosecutor know how? And we both know, Grace, and some of our listeners here, it's very hard case to prosecute labor trafficking. There's a lot of variables to bring out in the investigation to try to get a trafficker arrested. So with all these issues that were coming around, and in the, identifying these variables, the main variable is that organized crime is controlling it. And it's not just the Mexican cartels. Asian organized crime is very much involved in it. And to my surprise, through my studies, the illegal cannabis farms in California, Oregon, Washington State, they are being controlled by these organizations, these transnational organizations. They are holding people on the property. They are leasing property from people that are think that it's for farming. Regular Americans that have property and they're leasing it out, and they're growing illegal cannabis. And you wouldn't expect it in these areas because in many of those states, cannabis is legal. So they are actually housing their personnel that they're trafficking for labor trafficking on the property. And when they pull out, for whatever reason, whether it's law enforcement or moving into a different area, they just leave those people behind, and they're just left in a state. They've been trafficked there, and now they have no food, no housing, nothing to help them, and they're still in debt bondage, and they still have to pay, but they're left there. So it was an emergent theme that I just brought out in one big graph so that I can identify and for my readers of my study, identify the issues surrounding all these aspects of labor trafficking and how COVID-19 impact that. I really want to, for the implications of change, my recommendations were built on the fact that there has to be more studies done on child labor in the U.S. It's a real phenomenon. The shortage of workers and in our supply chain, Title 42, right? Under two presidential administrations, were funneling these people into those transnational organized crime, and it became a different type of push-pull factor that needs to be studied. Okay, I'm sorry.
I know. I just want to like put a little note on here that these administrations were from both parties.
Exactly. And that, as researchers, and for the listeners, you're researchers, okay? Your job as a researcher is to find the truth, not to have a political stance. You're there to find the truth. We're there to help these victims in this case. And playing a political game is not our forte. Our find the real reason in your study and bring that to the study. So whether it's two different political organizations, that has no ball bearing on it. Where is the issue? Okay, what is the underlying issue? And I think this kind of shows that, because under this administration, like you said, Grace, both administrations children were being labor trafficked. It wasn't just one administration; it was both administrations. Because when we closed the borders, how was everybody coming across? The cartels continued their operation. They weren't going to stop their operation. They were just going to figure out a different way to get them across, right? So legally or illegally, they were going to get their workers into the United States to make money, and they were going to traffic their narcotics and other things across, the border, and continue their operations. It's about money. It's not about people. It's not about politics. It's about money for the cartels. And I think there should be more of a public and private partnership. I think that you cannot police your way out of human trafficking, let alone labor trafficking or sex trafficking. It is not just a police. It is everyone has to get involved. So the public and the private partnerships have to come together. Non-for-profit organizations have to be willing to work with law enforcement, and law enforcement has to be willing to work with those agencies. The expertise of these people who have, mental health counselors, the ability to have people come in and speak to them and give them a direction. Children and women that might have been sexually abused have a route to go. Law enforcement does not have that capability. They only have the ability to direct people or make arrests. That's why we have to work together. And that was part of my recommendations in my study, and what I ended up with, because I felt that was extremely, extremely important to bring out in my study. And again, I want to just say, in the study with my participants, they really found, although they're there for the victims, many of them said, there are parts of sanctuary cities that we agree with, but it does harbor traffickers. It does harbor traffickers because they embed themselves with the migrants. So, I think that the study was germane. Grace, I hope you were on my committee. So I hope you felt in my study that it was a germane study. And I hope
if I didn't, I would have asked you to come on the show. That's for sure.
Well, I was waiting for you to plug that.
So that's for sure. Yeah, we all were very impressed with your work. One of the things that I want to clarify is that that Mexico is not even the top country for human trafficking. So let's clarify what countries are really the ones responsible. Mexico is one, but it isn't the number one.
No, it's not the number one. And many times, if you look at some of the Latin countries and some of the operations, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, it's Anadol, but you look at Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, right? Brazil. We have, as you work your way down, then you have Cuban refugees coming across. You have Africa, a lot of Asia, and there is a
great deal of Asia, Cambodia.
Yes,
exactly.
A great deal. Taiwan, you have these coming across. So you're not talking about that part is where the victims, and that's why I was talking about the money.
Right.
But who's running it are the Mexican cartels, the border operation itself. That part is the Mexican cartels. Mexico nationals are not the top people coming across the border. It's other people that are fleeing their countries further out. So think about the distance that they are traveling from the beginning to the end. Someone is pushing them along the way because they don't know the route. All right, that's all cartels. Mm-hmm. From their beginning to their end. That's all cartels.
Yes. So it's 10 to 8, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. We actually have a few folks that are present in the webinar, and I'm wondering if Jillian or Kino or Michelle, Mike, Stephanie, Ivana, Alexia, I think I said Jillian already. I can give you talking privileges if you're interested, if you want to raise your hand and ask Dr. Mottolo a question. Please do so now. Now's your time to do that, and I can give you your mic privileges. If not, perhaps in the YouTube chat, if anybody has a question. And in the meantime, we got one. We got Jillian. Okay, great. Go ahead, Jillian.
Good evening, Dr. Telesco, Dr. Mottolo. And also, I'm a Sister in Blue retired NYPD, so I appreciate both of you. Question is, so I just actually did some research myself on sex trafficking, because obviously there's a lot more peer-reviewed journal articles on it than there is labor trafficking. So my question is, do you think that there's any policy recommendations that could be made that would help alleviate the increased rate of labor trafficking we've been seeing?
Ooh, policy. That's a great question, Julian, because in this particular situation, when you're dealing with a multitude of agencies. Policies become a problem because certain states are sanctuary states, don't permit them working with federal agencies. So even if a policy is brought about by federal organizations, it might not actually be represented by certain states or not be enforced by certain states because they have the sanctuary city, a sanctuary cities policy. I think that one of the policies that should be brought out to help is to, and this is not a political stance, this is the truth, is that ICE should be allowed with other federal agencies to work with local law enforcement and the non-for-profit organizations to go after traffickers. I think in a totality of human trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, you're doing a disservice to those victims if you are not allowing these agencies to talk, Julian. And I think policy-wise, I think that would be the first thing. We have HSI, we have federal agencies, a very, very good friend. Heather Fisher is doing some phenomenal work. She's traveling overseas to go after the supply chain in other countries that we're dealing with that are human trafficking or using labor traffic work to send stuff over to our stores here. She's doing phenomenal work doing that. So I think that we should start there. It would be, I think any policy that would be brought about in any government would be viewed by certain states or state governments as not even an entity in their repertoire to enforce, to be honest with you. Does that make sense, Julian? I hope I answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Mike. Mike? You can use your mic, Mike.
I am so sorry. Yes,
That's okay.
I'm a little older than most, so yes, sometimes, you have these moments where you don't unmute.
I bet you're not older than I am, but go ahead.
Dr. Mottolo, I really appreciate you being here this evening and speaking to us on this subject matter. First of all, before my question, I really wholeheartedly agree with you that I do believe the federal government and locals who are all investigating this should get together and really cooperate as one, under the one banner, to take care of these issues, of course. My question to you, sir, is during your study, did you see an increase because of COVID and because everybody was shut in? Did you see an increase in domestic servitude type cases?
Absolutely. As a matter, a lot of the participants were willing to discuss that, and the fact that a lot of domestic workers were held right in homes, which is something that is not reported, and that is one aspect that I didn't bring up, and it's very important. And Mike, thank you for bringing that up, and Julian, I forgot to mention, thank you for your service. Is that our victims don't report, all right, their servitude or their victimization when many times in sex trafficking and labor trafficking, they don't report it. So how do we know what the victims are? That is one of the reasons why I use a qualitative study in this aspect, because for a quantitative study, victims are not going to admit that they're victims. Oftentimes they don't. So finding those victims in situations like domestic, where they're in a home, very hard unless they self-identify, which they don't. But my participants are all on the non-government organization, right? They either were practitioners once before and now work for non-for-profit organizations. They advise me that they are finding a lot of people coming forward from domestic servitude. They would, the homeowner or the property owner would take their visa and hold their visa hostage so they couldn't leave. And it was one of their ways to keep them there, especially during COVID. I hope that answered your question, Mike.
Yes, sir, it did very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mike.
So we have Kino. Go ahead, Kino.
Okay, I think my question was from a law enforcement perspective. Like, how can we educate more like local law enforcement on this issue? And like, what are some signs that we should look for as a local law enforcement perspective?
Again, I appreciate that. That's you guys. I tell you, you guys are giving me great questions. You're right in line.
Hey, these are our PhD students.
These are great questions. I will tell you one thing I found: public and private is not working together. Non-for-profit organizations are, like, I was using one like Hope for Justice and this Polaris Project and other organizations are trying to educate law enforcement. And many times they're rebuffed, even though many of them are retired law enforcement working for these organizations as investigators. They're rebuffed by these organizations because they're no longer law enforcement. I think they need to do a little bit of their background. I think they need to identify that these organizations are who they are and who's doing the training, and allow these organizations to give training. Many times it's free, which I don't understand why agencies will give pushback on that type of training. It's one of the situations that I found during the study. I don't understand why any agency would not accept free training, especially just because they're a non-for-profit organization. It seems that if it's not federally done or federally funded, which HSI I mentioned is doing excellent work in it. They are going across the country, trying to educate law enforcement, but they are only so big, and there are only so many trainers, right? And they really have to start with some of these agencies. And as Grace and I always saw in the NYPD, train the trainer, right? Get someone in the agency. You can bring a non-for-profit organization in, have them start doing the training, and then those trainers start doing it in the academy, right? Get them early stages, and I believe that could be a breaking point or a training point to excel the program. And on that, because you brought up a great point, is we have to do it right here in academia. More colleges have to have human trafficking classes, which many don't. We have to have right. We have to have human trafficking. Yep. We have to have classes because these are possible future cops, agents working for federal agencies. So why are we not offering classes in academia to better to get a better threshold of undergrad, grad, and PhD programs? We should have something in place, and many agents, they don't. We offer one, but many don't. I hope
okay, so I have a question here from Michelle. Michelle, do you want me to just give you talking privileges? Because I know you had your question in before Alexia raised her hand. So I just gave you some talking privileges. If you want, Michelle, you could just go to your mic, unmute yourself, and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I was wondering, have you noticed any correlation between labor trafficking and the foster care system?
There's actually nice job, Michelle. There was a study done. I might be getting a little feedback.
Good.
Okay. There was a study done in Florida where they actually found a lot of children in the foster care system are being trafficked into labor. They are, they're kind of, terminology. They're certain people don't care, and they use the foster care system as a money-making system to bring children in, and then they are putting the kids to work, and they are making the kids bring the money back into the home. So yes, absolutely, Michelle. It was a study done, I think, in 2017, and it was done in the foster care system in Florida. I believe it was 2018, which you can go look at that study. But again, Michelle, that's a great point, because that's another aspect of a study or research that should be pursued. We need to get that out there.
Yeah. Alexia, go ahead.
Okay, I'm unmuted. All right. So I know you touched on a lot of things. However, I'm not a police officer. I was military, but I know a lot of the
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. I know a lot of the police officers that are in the class, they've also been talking about the artificial intelligence. How do you think that that could help in the future towards breaking this whole like trafficking people thing?
Ooh, I think that it's a great point because it's the wave of the future, right? I think that statistically, we should use AI to get involved in this more. I think that AI can be used to monitor even our immigration system. It's getting more involved. I'm not a AI person or a technology based person where I can speak by the cyber side of it. But I believe AI can be used many times in that cyber world, social media world, because a lot of the migrants use social media from their own country, cell phones, to find work or are lured in by that. And maybe we can use AI to identify these illegal sites that are using or trying to bring people in based on work. And then when they get there, it's like a excuse me, I lost exactly the word that I was going to use, but basically, they tell them they're going to come to do one job for a corporation, and they end up being sex trafficked, or they end up being put it to labor. No, you're going to sell, and this is an actual case that somebody advised me of. You're going to actually sell ice cream on the corner, and you're only going to be paid $20 a day. And they take their visa and they put them to work. That person learned of the job through social media in their own country. So can AI be used in that type aspect? Can we use AI for the social media aspect or in the computer world? Because more of it's coming out in the computer world.
I just want to interrupt a second before we take any more questions. I'm sure you're aware of this report. It's International Labor Organization report. I think it was September 2022. And they talk about, it's a global estimate of, and they call it modern slavery. So they've broken it down into these three basic categories of forced labor, forced marriage, which we haven't talked about at all,
yeah,
and modern slavery. And the top regions, if you will, not countries, but regions, the number one is Africa. The second are the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm making the assumption here, tell me, you're the expert, you've done the literature review. You did a phenomenal chapter 2, if I remember correctly. So, you've got the United States, North America, who are benefiting, if you will, from the trafficking. And then you've got South America providing, the demand. So they're providing the supply and we're providing the demand. North America, South America. The third region is the Arab states. The fourth is Asia and the Pacific. And then the fifth is Europe and Central Asia. But the largest forced labor, the largest is Asia. Forced marriage, also Asia. Modern slavery, also Asia. So that's something that if any of our viewers are interested in this research, just look it up. International Labor Organization, the September 2022 report on global estimates of modern slavery. Back to any questions. Do we have any other raised hands? Justin, I always like to give you a play. So any questions that you might have, Justin? Let's get Justin on here. I don't know. I haven't been monitoring the YouTube chat at all. So have you, Justin?
Yeah, so I actually have been monitoring the YouTube chat. The questions that were asked were already answered. So a lot of them were answered.
Good. So why don't you ask a question? You get to spotlight now. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I did have a lot of questions as well. They were kind of already answered, but I can go into one still. One is basically touching on like what role does the socio-economic factors play in the risk of labor trafficking, especially with the effects of like COVID-19.
Right. Um, oh, can you hear me still? Everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. So I would go with a study that was done by the International Labor and United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. If you look at the global estimates, like let's say around 2020, all right, I think it was around 160 million children are trafficked labor globally. Okay, so when you talk about the social factor about COVID-19, it exacerbated the child labor situation because they're putting more children at risk. They're being pushed into labor, right? Like the World Bank economic has predicted that poverty estimates are growing, and the combination between the Ukraine war, right, and the pandemic led to like something like 70 or 90 million people in 2022 in poverty, right? I think the growing inflation and predictions, and people that are fleeing these poverty-stricken areas, they're putting it a substantial risk to children, and children look to adults as the people that are going to help them, right? And many times they're taken advantage of for that reason. So children and families globally, right? It's unprecedented with the migrants and the U.S. border because Grace, you brought up overseas, and my study stayed in the United States for that reason, because that could have been it would have been just too big.
Right. Of course.
Right.
I just wanted to give global context.
Right.
Especially in light of the fact that when we hear about the border and we hear about trafficking, especially labor trafficking, all minds go to Mexico, and that's a reductionistic
Absolutely.
thought.
Absolutely. And I did an article, Grace, I'll send it to you. I did an article with two of my fellow workers, two of my fellow professors, and we did a study actually on that, and we was posted in Domestic Preparedness Journal. It identifies that that criminals are trafficking children, and it's based on the increases of production and supply chain, right? So we you have the United States is not immune from labor shortages in this situation. So our children are being put in these positions where they're working on chicken farms, children working on chicken farms in horrible conditions with sickness. And, our population of our children are not getting medical. These kids are not getting medical. They're not getting help. So I think that aspect of it speaks for itself on one case in which it's hurting the people.
Yeah.
Victims.
One of our undergrads, Sean Stanton, he's asking a question about, so how do we stop this? How do we stop this train from continuing to come into the station? You and I both know the answer to this. When the demand ends, the supply will end.
Exactly.
It's not just on the other side of this. It's not just on enforcement. It's a global issue. But I mean, are there any solutions?
I mean, transnational organized crime is always going to find a way. I don't know if you can ever stop it. I mean, we've made policies and laws. The United States has some of the harshest laws against traffickers, and it continues to happen. How do we curtail it? How do we education? One, studies like this, and for everybody out there that is starting to conduct studies, bringing light to the situation. And then obviously pushing our politicians to pass policies that are going to benefit these victims, but not hurt them. Let's go after the traffickers.
We don't want to criminalize the victims.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
And that's one of the issues that I mentioned, and then I'm talking about in the study, and I don't want to bring up the sanctuary cities again. It's not the point about sanctuary cities, but if you have victims, right? When traffickers start embedding themselves with the victims, right, as though they're victims, of policies, we're losing the traffickers.
Right.
And they continue to traffic and victimize those victims. So I will tell you one specific case that one of my participants brought up was how the cartels are sending juveniles, 15-year-olds, on those planes that are being brought, or those buses, and that juvenile is actually collecting the money for the debt bondage, but because they're a juvenile and they're able to stay in the country. So the cartels are always going to find a way. It's us being one step it's us being one step above that, right? And identifying,
which we aren't,
which we're not.
Right. We're one step behind it.
We're always one step behind. Isn't it?
Yes,
seems to be the way?
exactly.
Is that way?
Well, Tony, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. Thank you so much for your study, for your research, for your earnest interest in this critical topic. Lots of luck and many blessings to you on your professor track. Now that you're in academia, what did you call yourself? A
pracademic.
A pracademic.
Yep, practitioner, academic.
Pracademic. Yeah.
It's been coined by somebody. It was coined by somebody else. I'm just
it's good. I like it. It's great. It's great.
I look at you as a pracademic. So.
I'm a pracademic, but I'm also a little bit of an entertainer. So how would you pracademic entertainer? Okay.
Listen, you're the only one who understands me on this show, being from New York. So.
I do. Well, so does Jillian. So, but anyway, Tony, thank you so much for being here with us. We hope we get to do some more things in the future. We'll definitely be in touch, and be safe. Continue your good work. And thank you again for being here tonight.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for having me. Thank everybody for allowing me to be part of this, and go NSU. Please continue on. Go.
Fins up.
Great program.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tony.
Okay. Thank you.
So I want to say thank you to Dean Durham, our dean. Thank you to the other deans, Dr. Kushner and Dr. Castro, all of our students. Thank you to Justin. Shameless plug, what's coming up. We've got 3 more episodes of the Investigation with Dr. T this semester, this season, if you will. We have next week, Sean Lawler, Dr. Sean Lawler, and it's a day in the life of a DEA agent. That's going to be really fascinating and interesting. And then we skip Thursday, Thanksgiving. I was thinking about having, like the pardoned turkey. Usually Washington, D.C., the White House will always pardon a turkey. I was thinking about having that turkey come on the show, but we decided against it. So we won't have a show on the 23rd, Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. On the 30th, we have our last Unfound for the season. And then on December 14th, save the date, mark your calendars, we have Chief James Poland from the Davie Police Department. He's going to talk a little bit about best practices in policing, and he's going to plug away the Davie Police Department. They are hiring, and we're going to talk a little bit about recruitment. We're going to talk a little bit about their police department, and those are the next 3 shows that we have for this season. We have an amazing lineup for next season already, but I don't want to steal the thunder. We'll probably talk about that on December 14th. But anyway, have a very good night. Stay safe, everyone.